Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Journey of Faith. And I'm your host, Simon Mac Innis. And this week, it gives me great pleasure to welcome a lifelong friend of mine, Stacey Stockford. Stacey and I grew up in the same town, just a few years apart from each other. But the cool thing about it is that about 45 years later, we reconnect. And our families back in Woodstock, New Brunswick, are real good friends. My dad and your dad were well known to each other. And the saying goes in Woodstock, if you needed something welded or manufactured, you go to Stockford's Welding. And Stacey, I want to welcome you to the show. And Stacey and I reconnected, like I said, about 45 years after growing up in the same town. And we connected through another organization called Giver Marketing and our mutual friend, Tim. And so, Stacey, I want to welcome you to the show. And I look forward to sitting down with you and hearing your side of the story. So, welcome.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks so much for having me on as your guest. I'm honored to be here. Um, so Simon and I met and reconnected. It was kind of funny. I was on a call one day with the CEO of Giver Marketing, Timothy Morgan, and he happens to go, "Hey, I met this other Canadian guy, and he's in California. Timothy's in California or Oregon, I think he is now, but he's like, "Hey, I just recently met this other Canadian and like he's from Newfoundland." And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." He's like, "I want to connect you two because you probably have this Canadian um interest or whatnot." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." So we get on a call and we get talking, and he recognizes my last name, and one of my youngest uncles and him went to high school together, and just kind of a story like that. And then we've been connected kind of ever since. And it's been awesome to see the journey that Simon's been on and to watch him grow and watch his podcast grow. That's been great as well. And it's been a great honor. We've been trying to get together for over a year now or better
Absolutely. Yeah.
to record this. So it's great to hear. And when I think about faith and what does my faith mean to me and where did it all start? It started very young. So it started, I'd have to say my earliest memories of any type of faith journey or hearing the Bible or listening would be probably when I was around, earliest memories, probably around five or
Okay.
so, going to visit Grandma and Grampy at the farmhouse, and my Grampy being a self-ordained pastor. And there was always prayer time, there was always Bible, but I never really understood it, right? Like
Right.
it didn't, like, for years and years and years growing up, Grampy also had a little log cabin church in Mainstream. And Sunday evenings he would go and preach in his church when there was a really small congregation. And many a nights that I would go, not every week, but the times that I would throughout the years, fall asleep in the pews listening to him preach, because it wouldn't just be an hour, it would be sometimes 10 or 11 o'clock at night on a
Yeah.
Sunday night.
Yeah.
So hence why we didn't go all the time, because it ended up falling into time should have went to bed, right,
Right.
as a
Exactly.
young
Yeah.
as a young child. But
Yeah.
spending tons of time with my grandparents, hearing the old hymns like, Jesus loves me, the old rugged cross, and um just those are just a couple that come right to mind. But the really older hymns, and he always read from a King James Bible, which that's what I was gifted as well when I turned about 12 years old, a King James Bible. But I never got into it because it wasn't easy for a 12-year-old to read,
Oh, totally. Yeah. And
right?
it's not even easy for an adult to read, but it, definitely a great gift from an amazing man of God that really has a legacy in Carleton County for having the spiritual wisdom that your grandfather did. And I remember hearing stories of your grandfather having revival times at the church, and it'd be standing room only. And there'd be people in the summertime, your grandfather would be preaching, and there'd be people out in the parking lot because they couldn't get in the church because they heard this legacy story of your grandfather and the amazing wisdom that he would share from the Bible. And like services would, like you said, services would go 2, 3, 4 hours, and it was nothing for him to stand up there and just
Yep.
spout from the pulpit.
So when you think about that too, like when I think about my grandfather, and I actually just recently asked one of my uncles this exact question, because I said to him, I'm like, where did this strong, like, did Grampy ever talk about where this strong faith came from? And he's like, no, not really. And I said, well, there was always talk about great Grammy Stockford, but we never heard much about great Grampy Stockford. And then he kind of led into that a little bit about how he wasn't really close with his dad. He was close with his mom, and that's why, like, we always heard about that. So, but my great Grammy Stockford was touted to be like a very strong faith woman. And this is a woman who birthed, I want to say they had a family of 12 or 13, and a lot of them passed really young because back in those early 1900s, they had a lot of TB,
Right.
tuberculosis.
Yeah.
And so he lost a lot of family at a really young age. But now my grandfather lived to be 83 or 84 years old. I think he was somewhere around there. 9 children of his own. And by the time Grampy passed, there was at least 16 or 17 of us grandkids and a couple of great grandkids. So I mean, when you think about a journey of a man who came from parents who had such great loss, but still was able, and my great grandmother being able to be such a sweet lady, that's all the stories I heard about her. I did meet her, but I don't remember because she was really young. I was really like a baby, but and then you hear how my grandfather lived his life and how he would prophesy and preach and speak to anybody. And, he was a poet too. He loved to write poetry. He would write poetry all the time. There's a few published books. And we also have tapes, like recordings of him singing hymns or talking about the day or talking about how he got through times. And it's really something when I now, as a 40-year-old and somebody who was really honed in on what my faith is over the last 4 years, and I think about times in my life and that early upbringing that I didn't know what it meant and I didn't understand it at that time, to now where I am and where I can read the Bible now. I follow the New Living Testament to be easier to read. And then I reference that back at times too to the King James Version. It's like, oh, that really makes sense, right? And when people have gone through a lot in life, like our journey as a family, like my immediate family, my mom and dad and my siblings, lost my dad when I was 15 years old. My dad died. Our family kind of really at that point in 1999, which we're coming on 25 years, just kind of, he was the rock. He was the
Yeah.
solid foundation, right? And then when you lose that, it's a landslide of
Yeah.
events that has happened throughout the years. And it's something that took me a long time to realize and to see what was going on in my life. And I always had this motto, and I say this quite often. My life motto has been the good Lord has never left me homeless, hungry, or naked on the street. So no matter what I'd gone through, I always felt protected. For years, I always said I had a strong guardian angel that followed me through these journeys. And now I know it's a mixture of both. So now I know that there's been times where I've clearly heard my dad's voice guiding me in things, but then other times where it's like I have a strong pull to something. I can't really figure out what it was, but now looking back, it's definitely was because I was a faith believer and I prayed for what it was I needed to do and prayed for the answer. And to say that I've seen dark times just like many others have, I definitely have. But the strongest thing that's brought me out is my faith. And I
Right.
have said for like a long time that if it wasn't for my power of prayer and my power of understanding from a young age as to watching my family go through, you know, the trials and tribulations, and um, knowing that everything has always been okay, but just
Yeah.
never knew how it was okay,
Right.
to feeling truly that full faith in my heart and the abundance, like, and the peace over
Yeah.
the last like 6 months, probably the peace that has come across my body and my mind. Like before, I was a worry wart, like worry like crazy about everything. And oh my goodness, that person doesn't like me. I'm going to worry about that, or why this or why that, right? And now it's just like, you don't like me, then you're not meant to be in my life. You
Exactly.
know,
Yeah.
you don't like what I have to say, don't ask.
Right.
Like I literally sometimes people will ask me an opinion and I'll be like, all right, do you realize who you're asking here?
Yeah.
Like, before I answer this question that you've asked, XYZ, do you really want my answer?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't have asked you if I didn't. I'm like, okay. So I probably have to say there's been times in my life where I could probably blame for being brutally honest. But in the same breath, I don't believe in sugarcoating anything, because
Right.
what's the sense in that? Tell the
Exactly.
truth.
Tell the truth, and because if you don't tell the truth and you don't tell exactly what's on your mind, you're only leading someone down the garden path to the fact that maybe that is reality, but when it actually isn't the reality. So, would you say your grandfather and your father would be two significant individuals in your life that kind of what when they started educating you on the Bible and your faith, um, that you said, okay, these two individuals in my life, I really need to know more about this? Or is there a Bible character or a Bible verse that stands out to you that when you heard about this Bible character or Bible verse, or you encountered this other person, that you said, I need to know more about this Jesus that this character talks about, or the Bible verse talks about, or this individual in my life is sharing their story with me, that I need to know more? And that's basically the point in your life where you delved in more and you started studying more to increase your knowledge on the journey.
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I'm a part of, yes, my grandfather was like the early stages. Surprisingly enough, my dad, not so much, for the fact of he never believed in pushing us into one faith or the other. Grampy, being the man that he was very strict with them growing up. And he never wanted us children, like his 3 kids, to be like that. So we didn't really have that in our direct home. But what we did have was Grampy on the outside. So if we wanted to learn about Jesus and we wanted to hear our Bible stories and things like that, that's where we went. So if I had to think about people who were influential, it has to be my ladies at Pinnacle Forum. So I'm a part of a Pinnacle Forum ministry that there are ladies in the US. There's 4 of us in the group, and they have shared their journey and helped me understand power of prayer, what prayer means, what speaking the words into each other and pouring into each other is like. They've got to be probably the biggest turning point of, I really need to dig into this. Now, here's an interesting story. When I was growing up, my Grammy and Grampy, when I was like probably 8 or 9, had gifted me a Bible storybook, a huge Bible storybook. And for a long time, I didn't know where that storybook was. And then finally, my mom finds it and sends it to me at Christmas time. Well, I remember the Bible storybook that my Grammy had read from when we were little kids, and it was tattered and torn and well used. It was a well used Bible. It didn't just sit out for decoration, it was used. And the story that always stood out to me was David and Goliath. So the having the courage to step up to a giant with a stone and the slingshot. And it's kind of funny that you triggered that this morning or this evening, because this morning I was reading about that too in my Bible. And then here we go. This past Christmas, my mom had found it.
Oh, wow.
Had found my Bible. I knew it was at her house, but she Didn't know where it was. But anyways, I
Right.
knew it was somewhere there, and she found it and she mailed it to me. I opened up the Bible to a picture of her mom and dad's wedding picture, which we don't have a lot of pictures of my mom and dad because of a fire that we had as a young family. But anyways, there was a picture, their wedding picture, and I open it up to almost that story.
Oh
To
wow.
like, and I said to mom, I was like, did you put this in here like this on purpose? Like, was there a reason you put it in here? Because my brother's name is Jonathan.
Okay,
So
right.
right where she put the picture was about the story of how Jonathan was rescued.
Oh wow.
And during all of this, over the last 25 years, my brother has led down a journey of darkness, and he has been in and out of trouble for quite a few years. And then I opened this up, and it was a picture of my parents, who's, to me, that's where I began, right there. In that picture, that's where I began. And then to find that where it was placed was talking about how the people rescued Jonathan. And I was just like, everything, when you think about it and the words that are written, you open up your Bible every day, and what you open to, I truly feel a lot of times ends up being exactly the message that you need to hear.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I
So
agree.
you could intentionally go, okay, I need to go to this verse. And then you're like, okay, I read that verse. But then you keep reading. That's something you didn't intentionally go to read. But then it's like, bam, there it is. That's what I needed to hear today. So this morning when I was reading, I literally was reading about the David and Goliath story. Takes me back to when I was a child, and my Grammy would like lay in bed and we would have Bible story time, and she'd read from from that old tattered Bible story book. And then
Yeah.
I was the only, and the kind of more interesting thing is I was the only grandchildren out of all of our grandchildren that they gifted a Bible story book to and a Bible.
Oh wow.
So, and I don't know if I've ever really had a whole lot of conversations about faith with my cousins, but I know it's not really been a huge conversation amongst us to say, oh yes, I'm a believer, and
Right.
this is, I mean, I know that they all have their own things in their own lives, but those are two very big things for me. Like, I just have held the that Bible close to my heart for so many years, and even in times that I thought it was lost, it wasn't.
Right.
And it came back.
And
Just like me.
that must have been quite the surprise for you on Christmas to open that up. And I can only imagine the flood of memories that you would have had that day at Christmas when you sat there and reminisced about, for one, you reminisced about your mom and dad and their wedding. And even though you weren't there, but like you reminisced about hearing the stories, and then how you grew up in the house, and how there was so much love within your whole family that not just stayed within your family, but it overflowed into the community, and that everyone knew who the Stockfords were in Woodstock and Heartland and all that, and just the surrounding areas.
Yep.
And what that must have done for you on that day when you opened up that gift from your mom.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was um it just brought me back. Like, I opened that and I just remember being gifted that, and I was like, "Oh yes, this is exactly what I needed." And life is just something that, those lost moments, like the lost sheep, you do come back and you do find your way in life. And the biggest thing, if I had to speak to a young believer or somebody who was on the fence and didn't know what to believe, I would literally ask them if they'd ever had that gut feeling and they didn't know what that was about a decision they were trying to make or something they were doing. Like, did you ever have a really strong gut feeling? And have you ever stopped and meditated and listened to that? Because I truly believe that being in the word and reading the word, but as you read it, stop and listen, because that's when you hear his message.
Absolutely.
And speaking it out. So we always think about, oh, we need to read and we need to read silently. Oh, we pray, but we need to pray to ourselves. And that's something that I've changed doing. When I pray out loud. Like my words are heard
Right.
because that's what sends your message. When I read my Bible, I try to read it out loud because then I hear it as well. So those are things to get started in your faith. I am still young in my faith, but I know that now where my journey is the right place to be. I'm in a workplace. My boss is a big believer. It's a big part of our culture in our workplace as well, which is the first time that's ever. I've had other bosses that have had um different beliefs, definitely faith, but not a Christian faith. So
Right.
my boss now is a Christian believer as well, and it's just different. Like we have conversations about it, and we talk about how the business is going to grow when we talk, and we just kind of it just weaves, like twists its way in there and weaves its way in, and it's so nice to know that you're not judged.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And I can speak to that too. Because the job that I have, my boss is a Christian as well. And it does something for your soul inside, that when you go to work every day, you're like, man, I really want to go to this place and I want to interact. And then it's funny how when you do that, that other people start popping up in the equation because they hear you talking and they're like, "Oh, I go to this church or I go to that church," and then you get a little conversation going.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And when it comes to my current relationship as well, I we are both big believers, and when I came back into even thinking about dating again after a very terrible 7-year relationship, one of my biggest things, check mark, was I want somebody who's going to have equal amount of faith that I am, equally yoked. And I didn't understand that either until I found him,
Right.
until we started. And then it's like, oh, this is what everyone talks about. And this is what it's supposed to be,
Right.
right? And there really is a lot behind that as well, to make sure that whoever you're surrounding yourself with is also this can match you well, because it just gets, if not, it's exhausting. It's
Oh, for sure,
completely
yeah.
exhausting. And you're not leading your authentic, intentional life.
Yeah.
So yeah, my biggest turning point has to be the Pinnacle Forum ladies that really, really taught me and showed me what prayer was about, and how we've never physically met, but yet we are probably the closest four people
Right.
in a
Because of
very
what you
long
guys
time.
because of what you guys share with each other and all that, it's made you a cohesive group of ladies and all that. So,
Yeah.
Stacey, we're coming down the last few moments of our time, and I wanted you to just share basically one key element from your journey up to this point, that if people just tune into this part of the podcast and they don't hear any other part, what would be one key takeaway or life lesson that you'd like to leave that you haven't shared with the listeners up to this point?
I think the biggest thing is that no matter what your darkness is, there is always light. There is always um rebirth. You will always be able to come back around from whatever it is that you've been through, good, bad, or indifferent. If you're feeling down, know that there is light. There's hallways. These hallways are dark, but look for the light.
Wow. What a way to end our time. That's some deep nuggets to take away from this episode and to uh, go away and think about. And it definitely shows the journey that you've been on. And I especially like how you shared about the story of David and Goliath and the similarities that uh, show up in that story that also show up in your life as the struggles that happened in your life, but there's also the successes that came out through the end, and that there are going to be more successes that come in your life because you look at the story of David and Goliath. What happened after David defeated the giant? He went on to do many great things, and that wasn't just the one great thing that he did by defeating the giant. There was many other things that are recorded in the Bible, and that's the same thing with all of us folks, is that it's just that one turnaround that's going to change our life, and that there's going to be many great things that come after that when we give into Jesus, we give into God, and we follow that journey of faith. So, folks,
Yeah,
that does it for
absolutely.
Stacey. I want to thank you for sitting down with us. And, folks, that does it for another episode of The Journey of Faith. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. And stay tuned for the next exciting episode. God bless everyone. Bye bye for now.